I'm not. Hold on, what did it say? Snug right here. You know, we never had the timers on the touch bar laptops. Alright,
Okay. Contention 1 is inherency. China is expanding into South China Sea now. The U.S. and other countries are not effectively stopping them now. For Feature 16, China continues to militarize the SES. China has refused negotiations over territorial claims. None of the countries can overcome China's military might. Vietnam and the Philippines have moved to strengthening military ties with the U.S. They hope for more visible American military presence will deter China. There is little to indicate that approach is working. Contention 2 is the salami slicing advantage. 1. South China Sea conflict is highly likely. Confrontation is inevitable, and changing Chinese strategy makes U.S.-China war highly likely. Blame 15. The waters of the SES may constitute the military front line of the coming decades in relation to the actions of the China and the U.S. that will determine if Kaplan's forecast has been true, whether this future front line will be one of cold competition or hot confrontation. Beijing strategy is shifting in response to increasing nationalism and perceived threat posed by the U.S. with China's assertiveness is creating increased friction within the region. The U.S. is increasing its military presence in the region, enhancing security cooperation with its allies and partners, which also lay claim to the territory in the South China Sea. This friction is the potential to draw the U.S. and China into a confrontation that neither wants. China is changing its approach to resolving historical disagreements. Beijing continues to emphasize that China's rise is based on peace. However, increasing tensions in the waters of the South China Sea are seen as the waters of the South China Sea are seen as the testing of sincerity of such claim. 2. The conflict will start by miscalculation and escalate. Him 16. On the SES, Beijing has deviated from its position. Chinese leaders have defended island building as legitimate. There are a number of factors that could trigger conflict. They include the intensification of maritime disputes of China's growing popular nationalism combined with the government's effort to treat the issue as a matter of national security and pride, the weak crisis infrastructure of the Chinese system, and the lack of unity among China's large and complicated bureaucracies behind the danger of the escalation and stability and central government will be influenced. Anything to be justified in the name of safeguarding China's security and even if the risk of deteriorating regional stability. 3. U.S.-Sino conflict would escalate and go nuclear. Cunningham and Travel 15. Mutual possession of nuclear weapons does not eliminate incentive to use conventional force below the nuclear threshold, which could cross that threshold of miscalculation for crisis instability results in deliberate competition for coercive being played out at the conventional level. Each step is designed to bring out the two states closer to nuclear conflict. Neither state would want to take actions to provoke nuclear retaliation, but such escalation could occur as the intensity of conventional bargaining escalated. 4. In addition, a conflict over the South China Sea will hamper the global economy, slowing growth and killing jobs. Blame 15. The economic bonds between the U.S. and China and other nations are immense. Conflict between them would cripple the global economy. Economic relations between the U.S. and China expand substantially. U.S. trade with China will continue to grow and will continue to be foundation of U.S. economic stability. China is dependent on secure trade flows for a bargaining economy. All parties have a major interest in preventing one of the various disputes in the South China Sea from escalating militarily. 5. Economic growth is good for everyone. Growth increases life expectancy, education, and quality of life while allowing the government to fund programs for public good. Ferguson Roth. 13. Economic growth rate leads to standards of living growth results in lower infant mortality, running water systems, electricity, better schools, and education for children. Economic growth gives us the tax revenue for clean air and water, missile defense for health and education for private. It takes economic growth to keep that nature proceeding and all of us healthy enough to enjoy it. 6. Military to military engagement boosts overall U.S.-Sino relations, prevents unrelated issues, spillover, corruption, and drone. 16. Military to military engagement contribute to risk reduction, improve military to military relations, support and facilitate collaborative efforts to counter terrorism, anti-piracy, disaster response and relief, and climate change mitigation. Effective military to military relations can change tensions over issues. The reality of conflicting national interests is compounded by misperceptions and unilateral moves that have largely exacerbated existing distrust within the U.S.-China relations, enhance military to military context, and reduce the risk of miscalculation through the confidence that building declining security tensions might bring the U.S.-China conflict would impose high costs and prove disastrous for the entire Asia-Pacific. And the plan, the United States should establish guaranteed annual military to military exchanges with the PRC, demanding that China abandon military expansionism in the South China Sea. Contention 3 is solvency.
Switch pages.
1. Only strong engagement solves the risk of crisis. Mark 14. China's approach is problematic. Its refusal to compromise and continued reliance on escalation and commitment to change the status quo no matter how gradually is a recipe for persistent tension. Beijing sees escalation as a tool that can be used with absolute control and particularly without serious engagement. China is unlikely to back down. Should China use the force against the Philippines, the United States would probably be drawn into the crisis. The United States will be unlikely to back down in such a situation. And 2. The absent military engagement, the U.S. and China won't be able to respond into a potential crisis. That makes miscalculation likely. Quirk 15. China's maritime expansion is well-orchestrated foreign policy of the CCP and batting that war will continue. China is pushing the boundaries literally on its maritime and claims incrementally how to claim to all houses strategy, salami slicing, and slow accumulation of small changes, none of which is an isolation amounts to cost spelling out, which can add up over time to significant strategic change, building facts on the ground through occupation and declaration of new maritime strategy. Beijing builds precedent and physical justification for Chinese claims that Beijing's recent aggressive territorial incursions are the most recent event testing the will of international community of the United States. These events are dynamic action by Beijing to unilaterally dominate China's near seas, adhering U.S.-China relations earlier this September the 9th, tried to U.S.-China strategic dialogue convene the general consensus of both sides is a deteriorating state of the U.S.-China relations and the need for both governments to have a productive dialogue on their security concerns is deep and winding chasm of distrust is leading to the greater potential for misunderstanding and the lethal. His calculation of the time crisis demand of both sides is both clear substantive dialogue and binding agreements to sustain peace. Yet one retired senior PLA official said, if the U.S. wants to make China a threat, China will become a threat, China can only respond. I have 3 minutes. What do you want me to read, Deon?
We can just overload songs.
Alright, let's... Actually, that's good.
Okay.
I've got one.
Are you open for contact?
Yep.
Well, you see this concept. So military to military engagement, right?
The affirmative trades military to military exchanges in return for China to stop expanding into the South China Sea.
But military to military exchanges.
So I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that you're about to run topicality, but we have to understand that intrinsically military exercises are also intertwined with political arenas and dilemmas.
Okay, but so yeah, basically. So is military. So military to military engagement is classified as what?
Well, one, I'd like to dispute what you're characterizing the act as military to military engagement. We are military to military exchanges, which includes communication over trade routes such as freedom of navigation that requires the Navy to be involved in the first place to have effective trade relations over such the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait. All of these ports within the Chinese sort of area rely on having some form of military communication to run effectively.
So that says that in your plan about
military to military exchanges. That's the communication between U.S. and China.
So the communications only military to military exchanges. So how is that like diplomatic in a sense?
How is that diplomatic in a sense? Because it includes things that is much more than military. The potential for miscalculation is a large portion of the South China Sea, but an even bigger part of the discussion is economic trade routes, which require discussions between the Navy to effectively coordinate trade through the South China Sea.
So you're military to military exchanges, right? Like for the rest of the
That's what we trade. We're not military to military engagement. We are diplomatic engagement. We trade military to military exchanges for China to stop expanding into the South China Sea.
Okay.
Okay. So you said that absent, if we don't have any military, basically what you said in your last card is basically if like we are absent of strong engagement, like the conflict escalated,
How does it escalate? Well, our scenario is one of miscalculation. So it's like the United States and China both have multiple naval sort of ships centered in South China Sea. They don't communicate in the status quo, which creates an issue if like the United States or China were to push into the territory in a way that made the other one feel threatened, that they would respond hostilely because they perceive it as an attack on their homeland.
So are you putting like naval forces in like the south or the outside of the South China Sea at all to like stop them advancing, or are you just telling them, hey, like stop?
The plan is a dialogue with China over how to stop expanding into the South China Sea. We think that exchanging communication as well as like information about our military placement inside of the South China Sea is necessary to get China to back down in the South China Sea.
So another question is like, what are these annual meetings consistent of?
Like discussions of trade routes, where ships will be, and Navy's like purposes there, clarifying intent.
No. And then this. Maybe the time. Timer.
Oh, I'll try. I'm sorry. This one. She was in. She was in.
Yeah.
So for this, Sam is going to tell us what we call a roadmap and tell you how many off he's going to be reading and then where on the case he'll be going, so you know what order to put your clothes into. Okay? Remember you switch pens.
Okay, I'm gonna go TBA, then case, starting with case, I'm gonna go solvency top, and then all signposts elsewhere.
2 pieces of paper for the dissonant and totality, and then put solvency first. So it's a different order than what the 1AC was read, okay? And then he'll tell you where he's going for all of the other arguments. So if he says solvency and then reads a bunch of cards and says, now we're going to inherency, you pull out your inherency, okay?
And solvency was the third paper they read, their third contention, okay? Have it labeled that way.
Alright, we all ready? Is that a yes? Okay, I'll go.
A interpretation topical engagement is distinct from military engagements. Brown et al. The arguments of the Obama administration is unlikely confronting China's counter the U.S. government efforts to directly focus on the rebalance in ways that they are less offensive to China, and by apparent U.S. success in establishing culture of constructive engagement at top political, economic, diplomatic, and military levels of the two governments. B, violation of the affirmative plan is military engagement. All components of the plan involved in military practices, which is military engagements. Defensive Annual Report to Congress, 2015. China military engagement only with China's military engagement with other countries seeks to enhance China's presence and influence abroad by improving relations by foreign militaries, access to foreign military practices, operational doctrines, and training methods. C, we vote neg because one, limit allowing military engagement exposes topics and dilutes effective policy analysis. 2, debatability. They shift the topic from the diplomatic mechanism to the military strategy, which is a different literature base, eliminates topic-specific education and DAs and counterclaim ground, which based on diplomatic and economic literature. 3, topicality is a voting issue to preserve fairness and rigorous debate. Prefer this definition precise and key to limited and manageable topic, since literally anything can and is defined as engagements. That's Haas 2000. The term engagement is popularized and aimed at a controversy about Reagan's policy and the constructive engagement towards South Africa. However, the term itself has been remained as a source of confusion by meaning that a subject of analysis. The term engagement must refer to something more specific than a policy of non-isolation. We're going to go to the DA now. Uniqueness. President Xi is strongly political now. Sissy 16. 2 signs point that the fact that she is occurred greater political capital than a lot of the arm twisting. She is eventually managed to get local court tribunals to become more independent than local governments. B-Link, the Chinese hardliners want to take a less accommodating approach to the U.S. That's Helene 15. A policy blocking China rises with the further confirmed in the widespread view in China that the U.S. is determined to contain it. Revisions to the U.S. policy towards China must account for Beijing's likely reaction. Next, economic reform is needed to save China's economy. The CC 2016 crashes of the Chinese stock market on the first day of trading in 2016 sparked a reminder of urgent need to reform China's financial system in particular and its economy in general. Impact, discontent in China can spill over to a violent revolution. Economist 2012, ordinary people today protest in public. Complaints that would want to remain local are now debated nationwide. If China's leaders mishandle the discontent, one senior economist warned about a secret report that could cause a chain reaction that results in a violent revolution. Now we're going to go to solvency. Okay. So there's a double bind here by the affirmative. Either they're not topical and they are using they aren't using military engagements, which means that they can't I don't know what I wrote this. Never mind. Let me just go back to this. Forget the solvency, bro. Let's go to inherency. Military engagement is happening now and will continue. House and John, 2016. The military reaction has restarted significantly. The mechanism of notification of major military activities has strengthened. 2015, the air annex, the rule of behavior of the safety of maritime and air encounters have been completed. The institution of bilateral army staff talks about the June 2015 offer promise a new mechanism, a high level of strategic dialogue, pretending well for the future relations. The two sides have found a way to continue their bilateral relationship despite the existing tensions. Next, South China Sea will remain peaceful. Interdependence, desires to avoid war, accidents, and miscalculations are unlikely to escalate. Kim 16, China's rise will not be considered to pose a threat to regional security. As the peace-inducing aspects of China's relations with the neighboring and the U.S., one can automatically assume that China will indeed adopt an unequivocal expansionism stance, given that they're taking a measure to taking such a measure would be unrewarding as the potential cost far outweighs any benefit. It's hard to imagine a war scenario bearing in mind the absence of intense ideological competition as well as their complex interdependence. Next, economic interdependence checks conflict. That's Eikenberry 14. The U.S. and China are not simply posed with the geopolitical playing field because two countries also occupy key positions in the world economy, world environment, and world society. All these areas, China and the U.S. are increasingly interdependent. They are tied together in a deep and complex interdependent ways in various areas related to the world economy, global warming, transnational crime, energy security, and so forth. There are problems of economic and security interdependence. These circumstances of interdependence create incentives for the two countries to bargain and moderate disputes. Onto the military advantage. Economics makes relations inevitable. Let's go 14. Chinese officials work to gain the entry into the World Trade Organization to consolidate. The notion of China is becoming a huge economic opportunity. Chinese reassurance drives is included in selective easing of the barriers in trade investments and using a promise of access to China's market to induce a gain in formal recognition. To induce policy change, Beijing used the prospect of bilateral free trade negotiations to gain formal recognition that individual countries in the market economy, gradually challenging the WTO status of the economy in transition. China concluded trade agreements with Asian, Pakistan, and New Zealand, and in negotiations with Australia, India, and South Korea. Such policies that combine inducement and persuasion almost as a strategy of pacification, harmony, and enrichment towards neighboring countries. Next, solvency. Military to military is only a part of the larger dynamic that's Camp and House has done 2016 since the early 1980s. The political dimension have interacted with the military operations dimension in ways that complicate an effective implementation of military programs. Sovereignty deficit, there's no engagement, only containment, but on the U.S. agenda, that's Schaumbaum, 2015. The relationship between the United States and China has rightly been described as the most important relationship in world affairs. It is of vital importance to understand the dynamic that underlies and drives the relationship as a present, which are shifting while Washington and Beijing cooperate where they can. They have been rising competition in the relationship. This balance is now shifted with the competition being a dominant factor. Security now trumps economics in the relationship. The competition is not only strategic competition, but it is a comprehensive competition: commercial, ideological, political, diplomatic, technological, and even academic. And even in the academic world, China has banned a number of American scholars in the beginning to bring pressure to bear on university joint ventures in China. Roughly 2/3 of public view U.S.-China relations are competitive and untrustworthy. Views from Washington is increasingly difficult to find a position, narrative, and a trajectory into the future. Next, engagement fails to stop the aggressiveness of China and its expansionist agenda. The AF will not create the assertiveness needed by the U.S. to check China's aggression. That's Eisen 2016. Since the U.S. engagement has failed to prevent China from threatening other countries, despite the remarkable political continuity and the constructive argument that AGS and 5 Chinese administrations, the former Australian Prime Minister summarized Beijing's long-term policies aimed at pushing the U.S. out of Asia altogether and establishing a Chinese sphere of influence expanding the region. Next, cooperation efforts do not overcome the large U.S. military strategy of containing China. The Asian pivot is clearly laid out. America's plan for the Pacific region, that's Mearsheimer, 2016. In the 1990s, the Clinton administration did not pursue, did not pursue engagement. You could call that, you could do that in the 1990s because the China was then weak. China is growing economically. My card's there, I'm looking for process.
Great. You good?
Yeah.
All right, let's start with topicality. Your evidence says that there's a distinction between military to military engagement and diplomatic engagement. What is the distinction?
They're saying that, like, you can't, like, just say, like, we're doing military to military exchanges and call that engagement as, like, diplomatic because...
What is engagement?
Engagement is basically, like, coming together and making that. Okay.
Why isn't the plan that?
Because you're doing it through a military lens. So, like, military practices and stuff like that always spill over to, like, somehow be vital.
Okay, I'm sort of confused because your Haas evidence is like we need a very precise definition of engagement. Which piece of evidence do you think has the best definition for what engagement is?
I don't.
All right.
Our interpretation, basically, our interpretation of topical engagement is we're saying that it's distinct from military engagement in the sense of like the affirmative plan is military engagement.
Right, and that
All
piece of evidence is talking about
Right.
Obama shifting his strategy
Right.
in
And my
Northeast
violation
Asia.
talks about-
Why isn't the plan that shift?
So, if you would have let me finish, my violation from the Department of Defense annual report to Congress talks about how like China's military engagement with other people usually tend to have China more focused on its foreign military practices, operational doctrine, and training methods. So these military engagements or military
That leads me to, I guess,
that
my
you
next.
call will never be military.
That
they will
leads me
never
to my
be
next question
implemented.
about that DoD evidence. It defines what Chinese military engagement is.
Right.
Does the plan have to have diplomatic engagement for both the United States and China, or is the burden of the app just to have U.S. diplomatic engagement?
So, like I said, like you're operating through a lens of military engagement. So these exchanges that you call diplomatic will never be like a discussion. It'll be more about like
What
military
ground do you
practices. What ground do we lose?
Yeah, what couldn't you read?
Like I couldn't read like a counter plan because like you're not doing any type of diplomatic engagement. Like,
What counterplan is it?
I didn't read one, so like.
Okay, let's move to the case arguments. You read a whole bunch of evidence at the top that suggests that China is not aggressive in the status quo, and then the last two pieces of evidence are like cooperation fails because they will always be aggressive. Which is it? Like, is China aggressive or peaceful in the status quo?
It's both because China is peaceful in the sense that it does not want war with the U.S.
But they're still expanding, right?
That's
So
what it means. Like,
what does the
conflict.
What does the status quo do to prevent conflict?
So the status quo with there's not a problem with them expanding. Like, if there was a problem with them expanding, then it would have been like. What I mean by there's not a problem with them expanding is that like they've been expanding, but like nobody's went to war or any like signs of like conflict has ever arisen.
I would like the judges to mark that no signs of conflict has arrived. I'll take 3 minutes of prep.
Okay, folks, while Deon preps, I'm going to ask you a few questions, okay? First, did some of you find the speed of the 1AC to be a little too rapid at this point in your debate career? Okay. You get used to it, okay? Notice something that Doug did when he was reading the argument. Yes, go ahead.
I noticed that he slowed down to read the tags and the arguments.
Yes, very good. He slowed down in the tags, but when he read the actual pieces of evidence, the text of the cards, he sped up. That made it easier for you to at least flow the main ideas and then listen to the cards. Okay, that's good. Second, he sometimes emphasized key words. I remember one where he talked about mutual possession of nuclear weapons. So as you're reading the text of the cards, you as a debater can inflect or emphasize those words and syllables that you think are particularly important. Let's talk about some of the arguments in the 1MC. What were some of the big ideas, especially on case, that Sam presented? Why did he suggest, for example, that the affirmative wouldn't be able to solve it? It's some big ideas. First, what did he say about China? That they'd always be... Yeah, because China will always be aggressive. Then he said, even though the United States might be pretending to cooperate in the plan, they'll be trying to contain China with their military, their navy primarily, right? So those are some big ideas that will crop up throughout the debate season. He also said that we had to look at the big picture of U.S.-China relations, and just looking at these disputes in the South China Sea might not be enough. He's looking there for what we call alternative explanations or causes for the problem that this affirmative plan might not be able to solve for. So looking for alternative causes is another possibility. What were some of the reasons that he gave as to why war would not break out between the U.S. and China? Yes, Lyndon?
Because their economies are interdependent.
Yeah, because who wants to blow up the world when we're making so much money? So this idea of economic interdependence preventing war will be very important. The other argument before Deon begins is the argument that relations are inevitable between such large and powerful countries, okay? So we're never going to get to the point where we have no relations with China.
The order will be case this at T.
So it's gonna go inherency, advantage one, solvency, and then what's next?
It will definitely be an overview at the top of the case. Then it'll be a line by line. So the order is of 1 and C on case. So basically, my roadmap is this. I'll be going case, and I'll be giving an overview of what's happening in the debate. And then I'll be going answering directly in the order of what they addressed on case. So the same order in which they spoke in the 1NC on the case flow, I'll be addressing in the same order. And then I'll move on to the disad, and then the topicality argument at the bottom. Yeah? Yeah. That's not, I got it? All right, for sure, Dennis. I'll be only reading 2 cards of others. You can just grab them anytime. Everybody ready? Yeah? Our Fraser 16 evidence indicates that China has a refusal to multilateral negotiations with sovereign nations in the South Asian region. This creates a political realm of aggressiveness and desperation. Vietnam and Philippines have asked and received stronger military ties to the U.S. to securitize their interests against aggressive China. China disregards these countries to appeal for independence, making many small military advancements throughout the region to eventually gain a military hold on the entire South Asian region. This is our salami slicing of the fact that China hopes to use in order to control South Asia, but to gain a high geopolitical advantage as well. This makes confrontation inevitable and makes the affirmative control probability of the conflict. Why, you may ask? Because the U.S. were to force the U.S. were asked by Vietnam and Philippines to stop these advancements by China, while simultaneously China disregards these measures of peace talks, which turns the situation from cold to hot, which means that no longer peace talks will be negotiated, but bullets will be flying. That's our Blame 15 evidence. Our Kim evidence nails the head in the coffin to the argument, proving that great power wars will start by miscalculation because China's intensification of militarizing as a matter of national security against nation, but also illogical pride that will deter Chinese military from making most sane decisions at sea, meaning anything can be disregarded in the name of Chinese national security due to the rise of nationalism, taking the principle of military and government. The negative never gets as deep to their analysis of what's happening in the geopolitical reign of China because they don't have a footing at the table to what's going on, which means that you'll go on a frail 15 evidence that warrants to the claim that U.S.-China war will go nuclear due to China's and U.S. desire to escalate the war efforts. A scenario of war that will go nuclear because each superpower will be forced to raise the stakes. We force forced to raise the stakes in war, which means that inch closer and closer to pressing the bid break button, shooting nukes, we control probability and time frame on our analysis, because it's the fact that both countries will be forced to use nukes, and both must act swiftly to push that nuclear button first to win their war. Now, we have another advantage you're going to vote on, which is our economy advantage. China is dependent upon the imports responsible for bringing millions of Chinese out of poverty from the U.S., and U.S. is dependent upon the global trade with China due to the sheer percentage of the market that China subsumes, meaning the military conflict would be devastating for both countries in ways that massive poverty would not only be take hold of the U.S. and China, but rather the entire world, because the market's crashing means that multiple countries are dependent upon these superpowers, and they'll suffer. This creates scenarios of starvation by the millions, life expectancies, deployment forces. China and U.S. only to act more aggressive desperation to sustain civil unrest and political uncertainty. That's our raw and plain 15 evidence. The only way to solve these impacts with military engagement that creates a compromise scenario to resolve those constructions between both the countries. That's our quirk in Denmark evidence. The absence of this engagement, conflict will be inevitable, so you can vote for the app on try or die. Let me get case specific on this. First of all, they talk about military to military engagement now. Even if that's true, our demand is unique, and talking about how South China will back out, how China will back out in South Chinese seas. Also, they're not considering the uniqueness question to our first card on affirmative. It talks about how it's specifically about naval interactions that are not happening now. They say South China Sea will remain peaceful. One, I want to flag this here at the end of their speech. They talk about how do we never combat engagement, never combat their type of China's expansionist logic, which means there's a performative contradiction on the flow, i.e. the negative lie to you in the face. They said that China will remain peaceful, then we can't stop them expanding. Which one is it? Are they aggressive or are they peaceful? The negative does not know, which means that we're just going to incite that our first card is right, that China is using as a threat to smaller countries to take over places like Vietnam and Philippines. That's why the U.S. is there. Also answers their vital argument talking about the U.S. only agenda is containment, rather the U.S. is to protect international law of China disregarding coastal negotiations with countries like Vietnam and Philippines. Now, they have this only interdependence argument on the floor. Let me get to this very, very slow for you. They say econ independence checks conflicts. The pan is key to interdependence, which means that if war breaks out, our economies no longer trade with each other. History is on the affirmative side. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and we placed an embargo on 50 years on Cuba, which devastated their economy, which means that shows how war breaks that interdependence. So even if they're correct, their argument flows affirmative because the act is key to interdependence. Also, I would like to impact turn interdependence because for one, if interdependence exists between two aggressive nations, if the U.S. and China do not like each other, but yet they're trading with each other, that just allows more avenues for both of them to create aggression, which means that you're going to flow this argument affirmative because this allows for conflict to be inevitable. It only gains an act valid because it means conflict will be more inevitable when China and the U.S. do petty stuff like creating sanctions on certain economic sectors only to piss the other country off. Now, they have this other argument that absent no, I answered everything on case. That's dead. Let's go to T.
Answer that cooperation doesn't overcome tension.
Okay, they talk about how collaboration doesn't overcome tension, but they are ignoring our military engagement. It's key arguments. That's our solvency, talking about how only understanding why our naval positionings is there, those our plan text, allows for both of us to understand we're not being aggressive, but rather we're securitizing national security, which means that once we're both at the table and have these annual meetings for military engagement, it allows both these nations to understand each other's intentions so miscalculation can be solved. Yeah? Next. Let's go to this ad. First of all, to this ad, I'm going to say slowing economy is threatening Zion's credibility. Now, that's our Nathan. And 16 evidence talks about there are many unhappy because the economy is slowing down because people are losing jobs. G is attacking the state-owned enterprises that he has a big anti-corruption campaign. This evidence, we're going to flag this that flows. Affirmative talks about how his credibility is threatened now, which means that interdependence is key between the countries. And what's slowing his credibility is the slowing economy, the interdependence, interlocking it with the act being key, which means that we solve for his type of credibility, which means that we give the president of China the credibility he needs to pass a reform to solve the economy. I don't know if you know debate lingo, but what we call this is a straight turn. The disadvantage has now become an advantage for the affirmative, because the advantage for the affirmative now resides is this. We saw the economy impact on the DISAD because we strengthened Zai's credibility, which means that that we functionally are winning on this DISAD argument. I don't have to do much work here because we are already winning on our econ advantage on the affirmative. So you can already air affirmative that we are refixing both, revitalizing both economies in the country, which means that we are solving them at the impact level. Let's go to T. There's a devastating concession coming out of cross-sects. The definition of engagement from the one end was that both countries come together and create ideas. That's literally what our plan texts are. That military to military annual meetings creates different ideas on how we solve this type of aggression between two countries. We come together collectively as countries and decide why our naval positionings are the way they are. Now they're going to go for this military to military is not engagement argument, but we have our Drone 16 cards that says military to military visits are engagement. In the early 1997, the United States began a pursuit of approach to best characterized as the turbine engagement logic was centered on the idea that senior PLA was fully understood capabilities of the U.S. military would avoid conflict, best means to convey capabilities that would demonstrate. Across it.
All right, so how does this flow?
Okay, so we fundamentally straight turn your DISAD. So your DISAD story is that Zai's credibility is strong now. The affirmative plan weakens it because people are not accommodating to the U.S. These reforms are key. Without him having the credibility past these reforms, I'm explaining your argument, I haven't got to mine. That these type of economies, this type of reforms are key so the economy crashes. What the affirmative response to that is that Zai's credibility is actually low now, which means because it's an anti-corruption campaign and because there are internal disputes inside of China's geopolitical terrain, that the AF must be present to allow interdependence to resolve their economy, which makes the president of China more popular. Yeah.
Are you finished?
Oh yeah, that's it. That's
okay,
it.
so like how do you help Zai's credibility? Like specifically.
I would have said that. My evidence specifically said it's on Nathan that the president of China's credibility is low now due to a slowing economy. The affirmative is undoubtedly winning that our economy advantage is going to be a dead voter for the judges, which means that we help not only the U.S. economy, but China's economy, which means that we make the president of China more popular within the nation so he can pass the reforms that securitize his interests.
Okay. So what was your answer to?
So I have a few answers. At the top, you've already conceded bare minimum that engagement means just coming together and having ideas. That's what an annual meeting is for. We're not going to stare at each other all day. We're actually going to come upon meetings to solve this type of aggressions and miscalculations between these different geopolitical terrain countries. But secondly, rather we say that military to military visits are engagement, and that's our Duncan 16 episode.
So what do these annual military to military engagements look like?
Doug, I think you have a perfect analysis of this.
Okay,
Do we just like come together and like talk one time a year, or like what does it look like?
The engagement ends up looking like advisors coming together and discussing their intentions in the South China Sea. We've made a uniqueness claim that right now, over the South China Sea, no one talks about what the actual intentions of China and the United States are there, which creates the scenario for miscalculation we're talking about.
Okay,
the military exchanges those plans and attempts to coordinate it so that conflict never goes hot.
And on the basis, that sounds like people coming together and sharing ideas. Yeah? Yeah.
That's fine. Whatever. Yeah. So like, how does if U.S. and China don't have good relations now, how is like this plan gonna help that?
One, that this is what I mean by performative contradictions. One, you say that you say interdependence checks different conflicts and that it creates peace, which is a lie to what you just said. But secondly, we believe that interdependence allows some type of footing in the dialogue to diplomacy, and that's why military to military engagement is key, i.e. the AF is necessary to solve these types of conflicts.
All right. George, will you be taking some prep?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
During the prep.
So you can know so. Okay. Okay, folks, what did you think of Deon's overview? Did you like that? Okay. Yeah, an overview which extends the concept of the case can be a good idea because it keeps some of the affirmative big ideas and big themes before the judges. What is a potential problem with spending a lot of time on the overview, though? Yes.
You lose time for the rest of your.
Yeah, you might not, you might have wanted to spend more time answering some of the arguments on what he called a line by line. So I guess, you know, an overview of some sort might be a good idea, but remember, if you spend too much time there, you might not allocate enough time to answer some of the other arguments, which could hurt you in the long run, right? So there's good things, there's positives and negatives. Now notice, and this is something you should keep in mind when you're on the affirmative and on the negative. Deon put his case first. Would you call the affirmative's case offense or defense? Well, if you wanted to vote affirmative, you know, preventing blowing up the world and preventing, you know, a lot of poor people from dying, those would be reasons to vote affirmative, right? Okay. Now, the negative arguments against the case are what we would call mostly defense. In fact, they all are in this debate. But the affirmative's case is the affirmative's offense. There are positive reasons to vote affirmative. Whether you're on the affirmative or the negative, you should put your best offense first, okay? Now, there might be an exception or two. There might be an ethical or theory kind of argument that you have to deal with earlier that you don't want to forget about. But almost all the time, you want to put your offense, whether the affirmative case or usually the negative off-case arguments, but sometimes there are arguments, terms on the case, impact terms or solvency terms, some of which these names are on the board right here, you might want to put first. So take away from this, the order, put your offense first, almost always. 98% of the time, 97, I don't know, but consider putting that first and then going to your opponent's arguments. Now, Deon put topicality at the very end, okay?
It's very rare.
It's very rare, okay? It's very rare when you do that. Okay, what is the potential danger if you decide to put topicality at the end of your speech? What might happen? Yeah. No, you probably would get it right. Yeah.
Okay. You might not put the test to answer some of these.
Yeah. You know, what happens if the affirmative doesn't answer topicality? They lose. Yeah, they've essentially, in most rounds, they've lost the debate. Okay, there may be exceptions to that, but you know, you rarely put topicality at the very, very end. Okay? Especially if there's a lot of negative arguments off case. Okay?
So, my roadmap is I'm gonna go to the dissat first. Or you know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go to solvency first. And then I'm gonna go to the dissat. And hopefully.
Solvency PA.
Yeah. Probably line by line.
So notice how Jordan's written the block, so he's going to take the dispatch instead of the one of us will take topicality. Okay?
Everyone ready?
Wait.
You still need the sound. Can you pass over the timer sound? Everybody ready?
Yes.
I just want to make sure because some people be like, I'm not ready. Okay, on this afro, you want to extend our Hanil 2015. Basically, talking about the card really talks about the focus. Basically, it says the crash on the start market. That's the CC. Okay, so the card really talks about how they focus. The app focuses on securitization, which makes like the Chinese hardliners more avid to not accommodate to cooperation with the U.S. That's why we said that cooperation will fail. Basically, on both fronts, saying that because of the hardliners not voting for Xi, because he has a lot of international pull when it comes to like working with the U.S., that they're not going to actually go through with cooperation. So this causes more conflict throughout the region through rhetoric of mill engagement. Like, Xi and them already know what's up. Like, it's already in the card. Like, and next, extend our CC 2016, where it warns that the crash of the Chinese stock market on the first day of trading in 2016 is a stark reminder that the urgent need for reform in China's financial system is particular and its economy in general, saying that because the economic reform is needed, conflict won't escalate because China is too weak, which means they can never go into conflict with the U.S. because Xi is focusing on economic reform, so he will never create conflict. You can also apply this to the straight turn that Deon said he has, saying that because the solves for economic interdependence, that like because they're interdependent, like he helps Xi, but the hardliners are pressed to show Xi that working with foreigners is bad, basically saying like foreigners are the white devil. It's been proven empirically. So like so the U.S. can never help Xi. Also, he said that Xi's political capital is down now, which is a lie. Like, President Xi is strong now. You can extend, CC 2016 saying that President Xi is strong politically now, so he'll always have, like, enough political capital to actually get, like, actual reforms changed. Going on to, like, solvency. So extend our camp housing in Drum 16 in the warrant where it talks about since mill relations were restarted significantly, the mechanism for notification of major military activities was strengthened in 2015, and the air annex for the rules of behavior for safety in the maritime and air encounters was completed. The institution of bilateral Army staff talks in June 15 offers promise of new mechanism for high-level strategic dialogue, basically saying like there's already dialogue now, there's already military to military engagement, saying like they already have like air annexes and like they're already talking about the safety of maritime and air encounters. So basically conflict won't never arise because they already have economic engagement and already have military to military engagement when it comes to like disputes of conflict. So conflict will never happen. So that means that the AF has no inherent problem to solve for. Also, this means the AF cannot garnish their impacts because they have no risk of miscalculation because the U.S. and China are already establishing a new mechanism for dialogue and encounters of that kind. So like they're already establishing a new dialogue before the plan is even passed. So like there's no problem for them to solve for. Also, you want to extend the Chem 16. It says it is hard to imagine a war scenario bearing in mind the absence of any intense ideological competition as well as their complex interdependent. Kim talks about how the cost of cooperation far outweigh the cost of expansion and stand because of our country's locked interdependence. There is no world in which war happens because there are no intense ideological competitions. There is no intense ideological competition because ideological competition really spurs war. So like because there's no like intense competition between the two countries, they'll never have like a conflict or miscalculation happen. Also extend the Eikenberry 14. This warrants that they are tied together in a deep, complex, interdependent ways in various areas related to the world economy, global warming, transnational crime, energy security, and so forth. These are problems of economic and security interdependence. These circumstances of interdependence create incentives for the two countries to bargain and moderate disputes. This creates a solvency deficit within the AF plan, which means that the plan has no impact to solve for because of the nuance of the locked economic statuses within the hegemonic world. Miscalculation and conflict are likely to be averted. You can go on to like line by line. So like he talks about like how we're supposed to be like flip-flop because we said like they won't cooperate, but then like we're locked in interdependence. What I mean is like they won't cooperate in the sense of like basically the AF is basically a whole plan to tell them to stop, and it's more for containment. It's not for diplomatic engagement in a whole at all. It's more for like them to contain China in their own surrounding area, which like is like coercion. So like they're kind of like not getting anything out of it. It's not diplomatic engagement because there's no quid pro quo at all. They're like military to military engagement, but like they're focused on the wrong aspects of engagement. Period. So. And he said there's an impact term because it allows for an avenue of more aggression, but aggression is less likely because like they're friends. Like, me and Deon are friends. Aggression is less likely. So. He says that the Blame 15 card talks about how like China is gonna like go into increased conflict. Already proved like there is no conflict between them because of their economic interdependence and because of the DISAD. The DISAD really just solves like Xai's power and reform for economic engagements, which allows for us to solve for the AF better because they think like solving through the AF is like right, but it's not. So like, get it? No? Alright, I'll explain it better. So basically what I'm saying is that like the AF really talks about the whole AF overview talks about how the AF is supposed to be like this shift from like diplomatic engagement to military to, well, annual military exchanges, which is supposed to be very diplomatic, but it's not. And it causes like a more securitization conflict with Asia more because the U.S. is focused more on containment other than diplomatic diplomacy. Or they're more focused on the spread of democracy, which is bad. So like, you have to vote Ned on this side alone because like he barely covers it. I only got like 53 seconds. That's about it.
You're open for cross-sects?
Yeah, I'm open for, hold on. I'm open for cross-sects.
Perfect.
First question, why is the U.S. in the South China Sea?
So the U.S. is in the South China Sea because Taiwan and them are focused, are thinking that China is there for like,
okay, what you just said is that the U.S. is in the South China Sea because smaller nations is in fear of China taking over, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So my next question is, how are we there because of containment if Vietnam and Philippines actually asked us to be there to help their sovereign nations not get colonized?
Because like their sovereign nations aren't at risk of colonization.
What evidence, where's the warrant to your claim?
I mean, like, I don't have to have a warrant.
So you don't have to have a warrant to understand what political militaries are doing. Fine.
I mean,
My next question is this. Does the U.S. and China trade now?
Yeah.
Do hardliners like the president of China trading with foreigners?
Not really.
Right, so doesn't that hurt Xai's credibility now?
No.
So let me get this straight. We're trading immensely with China now. Hardliners do not like this, which means that they probably don't like President Xai trading with China, but yet you say that does not hurt his credibility with hardliners. Okay, next question. You say your easement evidence in your 1MC says China is expansionist and uncompromising and our engagement does not solve.
Yes.
Doesn't that create tension and conflict in the region if they're expansionists? And didn't you just say that, wait, at the top, I could have swore you just said that the other smaller countries were not in risk of getting taken over, but then you just admitted right there that your evidence says China's expanding and aggressive towards these other nations? Which one is it? Are they peaceful or no?
They're peaceful. And
so why does your Eisner evidence say otherwise? Why is there performative contradiction within your evidence? And you said you didn't have a warrant for them being peaceful, so can we just assume that your Eisner evidence is right and that China is aggressive? Because that's the only evidence you have? No? No? Even though you don't have evidence on the other side, and this is the only evidence, the judges should not vote on it. Fine. Your next argument Oh, I already asked is China expansionist or no. I guess my next argument for the next 45 seconds, let's spend time on your argument about interdependence. So does interdependence solve conflict?
Yeah.
Does war break up interdependence?
Does war break up interdependence?
Yes.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it is.
Right. So how doesn't the affirmative strengthen the interdependence between China and the U.S.?
Because China sees your advancements into the South China Sea as more containment, so they're more poised to do.
But then you just say you did not have warrant to that claim, and also don't I have warrants to say that we're actually there because Vietnam and Philippines, and you already conceded that with
You
your
want me to
Taiwan
read the warrant
analysis.
saying that you're containment? Because you already.
It's too late in the debate. It's going to be the 1NR soon. He's covering T, so you can read it in your 2NR, but you don't read new evidence in 2NR.
It's not new. It's already in the 1C.
You need prep, Sam?
Alright, I'm going to. Everyone ready?
Yeah, no, maybe so. Alright.
Everyone ready? Alright. Extended of Brown 13 evidence which says that military to military engagement is not hold on. Let me go back to the topical engagement is distinct from military engagement. This plan is not topical. They're talking about like military engagement, and this is not what we're talking about. We're here about diplomatic and or economic engagement with China. The interpretation speaks directly about how the administration of the Obama administration clearly has a sight and interest inside of the Asian Pacific region. He wants to rebalance the Asia Pacific region by using the rhetoric of military and scrutinization rhetoric as a form of diplomatic engagement. Topical diplomatic and or economic engagement is key to maintaining a fair and educational debate. A topical version of the act would have been U.S. should create a bilateral treaty with China with provisions to end China's expansionism inside of the South China Sea. This is more diplomatic because like they're actually coming together and talking about these things. More unlike like what the annual military engagement exchanges. Right, and then there's always, like, in this exchange, there's always going to be somebody who has an upper hand, so it's going to be an imperialist agenda of somebody. Extend the violation, which talks about specifically how the People's Liberation Army's engagement activities assist more than just military practice and are clearly not diplomatic, which clearly proves that the ad plan is not topical. Like I said earlier, the military engagement always has like a hidden agenda from someone else. They've done evidence on the T flow, and it is specific in the context of the 1990s. This is where they're saying like military to military engagement is good. The U.S. and China's relationship has vastly changed since the 1990s, so the conceptual implications of their arguments do not take into account the nuances of the relationship between the United States and China, and this has changed their military, and this has changed the views of the military and military business.
Say they didn't say a we meet argument, so they don't.
Okay, I got you. So this, they're trying to contain China's expansionism by being expansionists themselves. This is flawed logic. They didn't answer our standards or our voters, so we have the only standards in the round, we have the only voters in the round. You're going to vote right here on this T argument. Extend limits. Limits allows for better test of competition within the debate space, which allows for more participation within debate because it produces higher results in effective policy making. Extend debatability. This allows for better education on the topic, which increases participation in topic-specific education. This allows for better debate practices, which results in policy making and prosperity of critical ideology within the debate space, which makes this to the disadvantage of the case only saying that only proliferation is bad for debate spaces within the community, which causes a decline in participation and education within the debate space. Extend our voters on fairness and rigorous debate. The ask does not provide counter standards or counter voters. You go with the only voters in the round provided by the negatives, which means you sign your ballot right here on T on our standards and our education of our standards of education and our standards and voters of education and debatability. They can see this in the 2AC. Do not allow them to make a new argument about our standards and our voters in their rebuttals. Extend the Haas 2000 evidence saying that the app can literally try to define engagement, but look at the plan text in the vacuum saying that the plan text refers to military engagement. The app can't possibly do this. This is why you vote neg right here. Would you want me to get to?
Say they didn't make a we me argument, so they don't fit.
Oh yeah, they didn't make a we me argument. They didn't provide. So they obviously like RT in our definition was not contested against. So we have the best definition. We have the best competitive argument, the best understanding of what we should be debating. So you should go. You should vote neg right here on T. Do you have anything else you want me to get to? All right. That's it.
Great. Thanks. No commentary? Okay.
It's like, okay, it's a block. You gotta say a lot.
Folks, I want to go back to an argument that Deon made called a performative contradiction. He argued that some of what the first negative said about China not being aggressive contradicted with later stuff about them being aggressive. You remember that? Okay. Assuming for a moment that that argument is correct or true, okay, for the sake of the debate, what should happen? What is the result of this so-called contradiction or performative contradiction? What should happen to the negative? One thing you could argue is that the negative should lose because there's a major contradiction in their presentation. Okay, but I think it's the job of the affirmative in this case to make that argument. Say, and the impact of this argument, the result is they ought to lose. There are other possibilities too, that both sets of arguments should be tossed from the round because we don't know which are true or not, okay? But I think that the affirmative will have to make clear, what they want the listeners or judges to do with that argument one way or the other, because if they don't, if it's just like when you're contradicting yourself, what's the judge to do, right? Wouldn't that be a good idea? All right. Let me talk a little bit about the 2N, okay? Now, as Jenny indicated, Sam and Jordan correctly split the negative block. They went for different arguments. They didn't both talk about topicality. They didn't both talk about solvency and the disadvantage, right? Okay? That's correct. Even if you have extra time to go back and review your partner's arguments, if you're the 1NR, isn't probably going to get you very far with most judges. Because most judges want to hear new, fresh arguments the entirety of that 13-minute negative block, right? Because if you get back and say, well, I got a couple minutes left, let me review the solvency arguments, most judges will sort of tune out and think, oh, we could have gotten out of here 2 minutes earlier and gone for lunch or gotten some coffee or something like that, right? So don't try to do that, okay? Sam made an argument in which he said, and I know he's getting some coffee or going to the bathroom, I don't know. But anyway, he said we could avoid this topicality problem because there's what we call a topical version of the affirmative plan, okay? Why, if it's correct, is that a potent argument in the debate for the negative on topicality? What does it show? If there was a way the affirmative could have reworded their plan to make it topical, they could have achieved the same things they're trying to achieve, right? In the plan they did present, correct? okay, without avoiding the harmful impacts of having a non-topical plan on education and fairness in the debate, right? So that's a very potent argument to say you could have had it, you had plenty of time, you could have reworded your plan to make it topical, you could have gained almost all, if not all of your advantages, but avoided the problems of being non-topical and the effect it has on the quality of debate. All right.
Okay, and so the order is T, inherency, the salami slicing advantage, solvency, the disadvantage. T, inherency, salami slicing advantage, solvency, disadvantage. Oh, yeah.
It's going T, inherency, salami slicing, solvency, and then what's this at, right? That,
Yep. Is anybody not ready? Not having a clear interpretation coming out of the 1 and R is going to be a gigantic problem for the negative in this debate. There is no clear distinction between what diplomatic and military to military engagement looks like. In fact, the only argument Deon was able to make is a we need argument that the plan is very clearly diplomatic engagement. The drum evidence talks about historical trends that prove that military to military exchanges have been a large part of diplomatic engagement throughout the entirety. Also, we need because the affirmative is entirely a QPQ with diplomatic intents to be able to quell tensions as well as assure allies within Northeast Asia, which takes out a majority of their offense. We also definitely made the we meet argument, so there's no argument here. Now they extend the Brown evidence. The Brown evidence gives no clear definition of what engagement ends up meaning, which means you have to default to the drum evidence because it's the only one that talks about engagement and has it inclusive of military engagement. Now the T version of the affirmative doesn't end up solving it. Also, the affirmative is the T diplomatic version. They've given you the T economic engagement version of the affirmative. We are the only topical diplomatic engagement affirmative which includes this because it's what China wants. All of our evidence points to it in the first place. Now, all of your standard arguments, there is no impact to limits because we don't explode limits. It's one more affirmative. It doesn't move the goalpost in any particular way. You say there is better education from your interpretation. One is there is no ground law. So talking about South China Sea is inevitable no matter what ends up happening on the topic, which means there's no impact to including the affirmative in the first place. Now, you should default on reasonability on the we meet arguments because they don't have a clear interpretation of what engagement ends up looking like. Also, they are wrong. The plan is diplomatic engagement rather in 07. While state has led foreign policy organization defense plays an increasingly important role in diplomacy through engagement, combating commanders pursue engagement, promoting transparency through military to military conflicts throughout history. Officers have played critical roles in U.S. foreign policy formulation and implementation of this. Considers military diplomatic engagement activities as part of the U.S. grand strategy. Now, there's no independent reason for there's no unique violation given to T out of the 1 and R, which is a reason as why you should prefer all of our arguments. If you are skeptical at the end of the debate about what engagement means, you must default affirmative. Inherency. There is no military-to-military engagement that includes the affirmative plan. There's no naval discussions. Yes, there may be sort of provisions that have been set up by the UN, but they are not being taken advantage of right now, which is why true engagement is necessary, but it takes out the link to the disad, so we will concede that there is some engagement between the United States and China right now, which takes out link uniqueness. Lonnie Slicer. Conflict is inevitable in the status quo. It's the only way, the engagement is the only way to be able to solve for it. It's the biggest impact in the round versus magnitude. It's the only impact in this debate that ends up getting to extinction and conflict between the United States and China ends up going nuclear and causes extinction. It is accidental, which takes out a large portion of their offense. Yes, US and China do not want to go to war with one another on purpose, but it will be an accident because there is inefficient coordination in the status quo. The plan is the only way to facilitate dialogue that ends up solving for this miscalculation miscalculation in the first place. Now, I've answered the miscalculation or the dialogue now argument on the inherency vote. They say that their ideological competition is the only reason that people go to war. There is ideological competition between the United States and China. They've dropped the warrant that Deon extended, that there is increased nationalism and changed foreign policy sector throughout China that have made them more provocative and aggressive throughout the South China Sea, which creates uniqueness for the advantage in the first place. It also takes out a large portion of their offense because it proves the reason as to why China would want to expand right now and is willing to act more militaristically, because they see South China Sea as a vital component of their sovereignty. Now, you say they're working now because of the economic interdependence. This is uniqueness for the advantage. Yes, they are working right now, but without the plan, if a conflict were to occur between China and any nation that is a partner with the United States, economic interdependence would be undone, because the United States would have to come to the back of the Philippines and Taiwan and separate economic ties. Now, there's no a terminal impact to the econ stuff, so it doesn't really matter if I extend its solvency. Military to military, the Fraser evidence says that they are refusing to discuss right now, which takes out a large portion of the reasons why we're not discussing right now. They say the plan is containment. No, the plan is constructive engagement. That's the evidence that you've read for us that ends up talking about the way the plan would be framed in the first place. You say friends don't act aggressively. We don't think China and the United States are as friendly as you do, which is a reason as to why they would go to conflict. Is that? The link is non-unique, so it doesn't really matter what's happening in this debate. There's engagement in the status quo, which means that you have already triggered the link, which means Xi's credibility is already now. Also, the affirmative is a better internal link to the economy because it's the only way to preserve interdependence. Also, case outweighs prefer the big stick impacts. There's no impact to the DISAD extended out of the 2NC, which is a big reason as to why you should go to extinction. Even if they're winning some link debate, you should ask yourself, what does that do in the long term? Our scenario is miscalculation, which Kim agrees is the only way we will end up going to war, which is your impact evidence.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure you speak. I'm taking, no.
How much prep do y'all have?
450.
450? Alright, I'm setting 450. I'm starting when you I'll start when you start. If you start prep, I'll start.
Okay, let me make a few comments while the prep's going on. Way back in the 2NC, Jordan argued that Xi's credibility is up now. The affirmative had argued that Xi's credibility is down now. And there was mention that, well, we both have evidence on it. What would be a good way for someone to pull ahead on this argument about whether Xi's credibility is up now or already down now? What could you have done by looking at the evidence? You could have said, my evidence is better than your evidence, and come up with reasons, okay? It could be the source is credentialed. It could be, hopefully, maybe you have better warrants, okay, or reasons inside the card, or maybe there's a distinction in the dates. I don't quite remember what the dates were, but if you argued that, look, you know, my evidence is better because it tells you that more recently Xi's credibility is either up or down, and therefore accept our evidence, okay? So the idea that both sides read evidence on a coin only takes you so far. You need to compare the quality of the evidence, and that comes out of not only the evidence that you've read, but your own heads, okay? And if you make those evidence comparisons, you're more likely to win critical arguments in the debate. In the 1R, the negative made the argument that the affirmative had not presented a we-meet argument. In other words, an argument to the effect that our plan fits under your definition or interpretation. Now, the 1R points out that, in fact, that's what we did do, okay? But there might have been a lack of clarity here. I think the affirmative is probably right, but what could they have said at the beginning of their arguments in the 2AC? We meet. And Regina's back there saying, we meet. So sometimes using those magic words of that debate jargon can make things clearer. Sometimes it can mess things up. But sometimes you can say, we meet. We are diplomatic rather than saying, well, we're diplomatic engagement, then everybody around, including the judges, know that you did present a we meet argument. So use those magical words. I also think in addition to the we meet arguments, and I know because there is sort of an interaction, you know, is all diplomatic engagement some form of military engagement? It may be difficult to come up with your own, what we call counter-interpretation. It's often good to present a counter-interpretation that you argue is better in addition to the we meet. In the 1AR, Doug makes the argument on topicality. Notice that he puts topicality first. Why do you think he put topicality before a case? Yes?
Because they hadn't really answered topicality before.
Well, Deon did answer T. Perhaps he could have spent more time on it, okay? But he did answer it. But what happens is he thinks perhaps that Sam's going to go for T in the 2NR. And if he doesn't put it first and spend a lot of time on it, could the negative win the debate on that argument alone, even if their case is correct? Yeah, because even if the affirmative case is true or outweighs the disadvantage, if the affirmative's plan isn't topical, the negative usually wins. Okay? So putting it first made sense before the case and then the disadvantage. The last thing I'll say before Sam comes back in, okay, assuming he is, okay, is that Doug made the argument that if there's any doubt in your mind, the fault for reasonability, that we at least have a reasonable interpretation of the topic, okay? I think that's a good way to frame the topicality argument, but I also think that's something ideally that should come out in the second affirmative constructives. In the constructives, that you should defend reasonability explicitly so you can refer back to it so a judge might not think that it's a new argument.
All right. All right, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, it was.
I'll see that. Everybody ready?
I'm going to T. No. This T. All T. I'm just asking. I'm just stopping myself. She's falling asleep. I'm sorry, Tyler.
Everybody ready? Everybody? Fire. First of all, Judge, if you're going to vote for anything, you vote for T, because T is a priori. So T is a priori. So for judges that don't know, a priori means you look at that flow first. So basically saying that if you vote anywhere, you vote on T because there is no other way to look. But in the vacuum, plain text in a vacuum, their plain text has no mention of diplomatic engagement. It talks about military to military exchanges. And the violation talks about how, like, the People's Liberation Army, which is the army of the People's Republic of China, their military to military exchanges usually consist of activities about military practices and different military doctrines that go on. So a lot of the AF talks about how they're diplomatic engagement, but they're not actually, because if you look at, like, the violation, you just extend that there. So, like, also, they never made a we meet argument or counter standards. They want to come up here and fool you with the fancy theatrics that they did, but they didn't. So you never let them garnish any of their impacts because they're not topical. And even if they come up here and do like a performative contradiction argument, like I don't have to be, I can contradict if I want. I'm the negative. Like, also you
say that it's good for the people.
Oh, it's good for the negative to be contradictory. Like,
expand like multiple worlds good? We get to look at all viewpoints of the app.
Oh, it expands multiple worlds, and we get to look at different viewpoints of the app. Also, you want to expand where he talks about topical, diplomatic, and economic engagement is key to maintaining a fair and educational debate. A topical version of the app would have been that the U.S. should create a bilateral treaty with provisions to end China's expansionism in the South China Sea. Like, there was a topical version of the app. Like, and then Doug comes up here and says, like, this is economic. We're talking about the economic engagement side, but a bilateral treaty is diplomacy. Treaties are not economic value. They're diplomacy. So, like, also, their drone evidence on the T-flow is specific in the context of the 90s. The U.S. and China relationship has vastly changed since the 90s, so the conceptual implications of this argument do not take into account the nuance of the relationship between the U.S. and China that has changed, and these meal visits could be seen as the U.S. trying to contain the Chinese expansionism while they're expansionists themselves. Also, you extend our voters for fairness or rigorous debate. The app does not provide counter standards or a counter voter, so if you go with the only voters in the round provided by the NEC, which means you sign your ballot on which our standards of education and debatability. They can see this in the 2AC, and it's too late for you to allow them to make an argument in their rebuttals. Also, Doug forgot to answer the diss ad that Sam made on the T-Flow, saying that they only proliferate bad debate practices within the community, which causes decline in debate participation and education within the debate space. This is the most important argument that could have been implication of the future of this activity as well as the policy itself. If they're allowed to run proliferation arguments, then they would destroy the debate community. Basically saying, like, they're able to run like these arguments that go outside of the limits of debate. They basically make bad practice within inside the debate community. That's why the Armenian room looks so empty now. We should have a full camp full of campers like ECLI is, so that we can have a better experience for debaters and for coaches. Also, you extend our Haas 2000, saying that the app can literally try to define engagement, but look at the plain text in the vacuum, saying because the plain text refers to meal engagement, the app can't possibly solve because, like, they're not topical. So this is why you vote nay on your ballot. So yeah, topicalities a priori. So look at that before you vote on any other arguments within the round. They dropped the diss ad. That's damaging already. Like, don't let them bring it up in the 2AR. Doug also said that, like, our interpretation was like is very like vague and skeptical, but the interpretation basically just talks about how, like, the Obama administration wants to rebalance the Asia Pacific. So basically meaning, like, he wants to be in control of, like, what happens with inside the Asia Pacific, and he's more focused on the imperialistic mindset of, like, militarization and securitization of, like, the U.S. and his allies more than he's focused on diplomacy. And that's the violation as well. Talking about how, like, the People's Liberation Army only their activities assist for military practice and not diplomacy, which clearly is proven through the AF plain text in a vacuum. Like, they're doing military to military exchanges, but they never, like, specifically they talk about, like, how we should form inside of, like, the South China Sea.
Perfect. I have 2 minutes and 50 seconds. I'm gonna take off. Oh, I have 350. Perfect.
No.
250? Okay, I'm gonna take my seconds.
Now, Jordan went for T, or topicality, for the full 5 minutes of the 2 and out. Generally, the convention in debate, or the custom and practice in debate, is that if you go for what we call a procedural argument, or in a sense is a theory argument too, you know, whatever you want to call it, like topicality, you go for all 5 minutes of the 2 and out. All right? You put all your eggs in that basket. And often, especially when there's a lot of arguments on topicality, you know, in a varsity debate, that's usually something that's very wise advice. Okay, that's what the judges will be expecting: 5 minutes of tea. However, if you're beginning in this activity, you might find that the argument gets a bit repetitive, okay? And so even though it's not the conventional wisdom, I mean, especially if you want to practice going for other arguments, even though what I'm saying is not that, is not the conventional wisdom, it's not so bad in your early debates if you want to try to go for something else, just for practice, okay? If you don't, if you decide I'm going to just go for T and you only have 2.5 or 3 minutes worth of argument, and then you sit down, well, everyone gets to leave early, And I guess that's not so bad, especially if it's before lunch or dinner or something like that. But, if you want to get a little practice in and say, normally I would just go for T, but I think I've covered all the arguments. We're going to talk about something else. You might learn something too. But generally, if you go for theory and topicality, it's 5 minutes into 2 minutes. Okay? Even though it may seem like, well, I'm going to do it the rest of my time. Jordan also brought up this performative contradiction argument. Not sure I would have brought it up again. I'm not sure if Doug was extending it in the 1AR, okay? And even if he did mention there was an inconsistency between parts of the 1N on the advantage and some on solvency, I think it would have been enough to say, on the performative contradiction, don't let them extend it to 2AR. There's no impact given to it. The judge never tells you what to do with it. I mean, the debaters never tell the judge what to do with it. And so you can probably disregard it. And we're going for T, right? So it's sort of irrelevant at this point.
The order is T. Make sure you have your case flow just to the side. You'll enjoy that analysis, I promise. Everybody ready? It's going to be easy to vote on the affirmative and negative first. The only major reason why, there's a major reason why I didn't spend time on topicality. The negative fundamentally misunderstood the strategy of the affirmative. My joint evidence says that military-to-military engagements is diplomatic analysis, and how military-to-military engagement are diplomatic ties in solving political disputes, and the 1AR gives a beautiful analysis on how the 1NR didn't even analyze the difference between diplomacy and military engagement. Their evidence definitely does not have the answer like Sway. So you're going to default to the nuances that me and Doug worked so hard to give you to understand how diplomatic engagement is intrinsically tied to military issues. Also, Doug orchestrates beautifully how, even in today's time, diplomacy and national security play intertwined roles, which answers 2NR analysis of dates being told. That's our Reverend 07 card. Notice how the 2NR never reference any evidence because their argument, I'm going to keep 100. Their argument is that there's a distinction between diplomatic and military engagement. The problem with this is they never told you what the hell is diplomatic engagement, which means that the affirmative has been answering the question since the 2AC. I did not have to spend much time to win this flow. That our joint evidence is already assuming that military engagement is part of diplomatic engagement because look at the entirety of the 1AC, that this type of military exchange solves different conflicts between U.S. and China that on face is diplomatic. The only definition for diplomatic that the negative can give is crossing. Samuel Cooper talked about how our interpretation is how two countries get together and share ideas. Please, we are winning this argument that these annual military-to-military exchanges means that these type of shared ideas of military maneuvers are also the political ambassadors meeting here means that inherently military-to-military engagement are intrinsic. Now, my next argument is going to be that there's no impact to standards because limits aren't exploded and fairness is already intact because they were able to prep for this debate, which means that they knew what the app was going to be, which means we are also winning reasonability. The only reason why they went for T is because they was losing every other flow, and you know it. The next argument that we're going to make to nail the head in the coffin is that we provided the only interpretation, so that means you presume affirmative. The argument is that there's a distinction between military to military engagement and diplomatic. They never get that distinction, which means there's a presumption on argument. I'm going to cross-apply econ advantage to this diplomacy question on topicality, right? This is why I said the beautiful analysis on case law is about to be hot. We also talked about how we are winning the argument of interdependence, helps president of China credibility, which means that we're diplomatic engaging China with our actions because we resolve political internal disputes about China. There is a horrible thing that JL is going to talk about after my 2AR, that the 2NR never properly kicked out of any argument. He only talked about T, which means that he conceded that we're winning every other argument in the debate because my 2ARs be on fire, which means that we win, that we are helping Zai's credibility, which means diplomatically we are helping the presidency's election create type of reforms to sustain their political terrain. So how are you going to say that you are going to win this type of argument that we are not diplomatic engagement? We are already winning the we meet. JL told you in your meantime that when we were speaking that we had to say we meet. I fundamentally disagree with JL, and it's perfectly okay, brother. We already have a better clash in the argument. We saying that military to military engagement is fine enough to say that as diplomacy because they never defined what diplomacy is. On top of that, let me go to their dissent.
Reasonability.
Okay, I'll say on reasonability. One, reasonability because there's only one app packet and this entire kit, which means that it's lazy debating that kills participation inside this debate by the negative to only go for the only votes for topicality destroy the only app. This actually turns their dis-ad argument because it actually destroys participation in debate because if this affirmative is untopicable, that means every one of you students, all of your beautiful faces will lose on affirmative when you go and debate Friday because it's untopicable, which means it's out of your jurisdiction as a judge to vote against this because they are killing participation and creating bad debate practices, which means you air the debate towards the affirmative. That's reasonability. And also, the plain text in the vacuum means that you vote affirmative because our plain text never said military to military engagement. Right there it talks about a military to military exchange that resolves diplomatic tensions between two nations. They have already conceded all the case law. I'm not about to do a case extension here. They already conceded that we solve for the salami slicing advantage, which means that we solve these political disputes between wars between China and the U.S., which means that there are diplomatic engagements are key. They have never answered this, which means the case already is answered key. And also, this at the bottom means that if we are the ones destroying, if they say that we are destroying participation, that means they assume that all of you will lose on the affirmative. You can't do that, so it's outside your jurisdiction. Your only choice is to vote for me.
No, that's Deon.
Lazy behavior. See, I told you this. Don't want
All right, I'm doing Sam, Deon, and Doug for putting on this demonstration debate for us. In just a moment, you'll go back to your labs and have individual discussions.